James had always dreamed of a peaceful life in a friendly neighborhood where his family could feel safe and happy. After years of hard work and saving, he and his wife finally bought a house in a quiet suburban area. It was a beautiful place, with tree-lined streets and neat lawns, the kind of neighborhood where children played outside and neighbors greeted each other with warm smiles. James thought this was the perfect place for his wife and their young daughter to grow up. When they first moved in, everything seemed great. The house was lovely, the neighbors seemed polite from afar, and the community looked well cared for. James was proud to be a new homeowner. He looked forward to peaceful evenings and weekend barbecues. But very soon, James noticed something strange. One of the neighbors, a woman named Karen, acted differently toward him. She was a member of the Homeowners Association, or HOA, the group that manages rules in the neighborhood. Karen was what some might call a Karen, a person who believed she had the right to control things around her and often acted in a rude, bossy way. At first, James didn't think much of it. Maybe Karen was just shy or had a bad day. But the way she looked at him and spoke made James uncomfortable. She seemed to question why he was there. It wasn't just a casual greeting. It was cold and a little hostile. She asked him if he really belonged in the neighborhood. It felt like she was judging him without knowing anything about him. James was a proud black man, a veteran who had served his country, and he had worked hard to provide for his family. But Karen's attitude made him feel unwelcome. The tension grew quickly. One morning, James found something that shocked him. Karen's car was parked right in his private driveway. This wasn't a shared parking area or a guest spot. It was his driveway, his property. He wondered if maybe she had made a mistake. After all, sometimes people park the wrong way by accident. So James left a polite note on her windshield, asking if she could please move her car because it was blocking his driveway. But instead of an apology or even a simple thank you, James found a note taped to his front door. This note wasn't polite at all. Karen wrote that everyone in the community had to share the space and that he should not be so territorial. The tone was sharp and rude. She acted like she owned the neighborhood and everyone else had to follow her rules, even if those rules didn't exist. James was taken aback. How could someone be so disrespectful? His driveway was his own property, yet Karen acted like she had the right to park there anytime she wanted. James tried to talk to her calmly. He wanted to clear things up peacefully, but Karen was not interested in talking. She ignored his polite requests and continued to park there again and again. Sometimes she even blocked James in, making it hard for him to leave his own home. It was frustrating and upsetting. James started to feel that Karen wasn't just a rude neighbor. She was deliberately disrespecting him. Feeling stuck, James decided to contact the HOA to report the problem. He thought the HOA would help him solve the issue, since they were supposed to manage community rules and keep peace. But when he called, he got another surprise. Karen was a member of the HOA board. That meant she had some power over how the rules were enforced. When James explained the situation, the HOA didn't take any action against Karen. Instead, they told James to be patient and that things would be handled quietly. James knew this was not right. The person causing the problem was also the one controlling the HOA. It felt like a bad joke. Meanwhile, the other neighbors saw what was happening but didn't want to get involved. Karen was known for being difficult. Many people whispered privately that she had a history of using her HOA position to push others around, but no one wanted to confront her. James felt isolated. It was hard to stand up when everyone else was silent. Still, he didn't give up. He started documenting everything. Carefully, he took pictures of Karen's car in his driveway, noted the dates and times, and even recorded videos when possible. He hoped this proof would help him make a strong case with the HOA or, if needed, with the police. But instead of getting support, James received an unexpected warning letter from the HOA. The letter said he was violating parking rules. It was confusing and unfair. James did not own any cars that were parked illegally, but the HOA threatened fines and penalties anyway. It felt like the whole system was working against him. He was frustrated and hurt. All he wanted was to live peacefully in his own home, without someone treating him like he didn't belong. Throughout this time, James tried to keep calm and stay respectful. He didn't want to start a fight. He knew that being angry or rude wouldn't help. Instead, he focused on gathering evidence and trying to understand the rules. He talked to a few neighbors who seemed friendly and asked if they had ever faced similar problems. Some admitted they had small issues with Karen before, but gave up because she was so powerful in the HOA. James's wife and daughter watched all this happen too. His wife worried about how stressful the situation was becoming for James. She reminded him that their family deserved peace and respect. Their daughter was too young to fully understand, but she could feel the tension at home. James promised himself he would not let this situation break his family's spirit. As weeks passed, the problem with Karen parking in the driveway became a daily annoyance. James started to dread coming home, wondering if he would find her car, blocking him again. The neighborhood didn't feel so friendly anymore. What was supposed to be a fresh start in a new home was turning into a battle over respect and fairness. James thought about what to do next. He had tried talking, asking politely, contacting the HOA, and even waiting patiently. Nothing worked. He realized this wasn't just about parking, it was about standing up for himself and his family. He knew he had to be strong and prepared to take action if necessary. Even though the situation was difficult, James still believed in justice. He hoped the truth would come out, and that the community would support him eventually. He wanted to show that no one should be allowed to treat someone else unfairly, especially in their own home. He knew this was only the beginning of a bigger story. After weeks of dealing with Karen's disrespect, James felt more frustrated than ever. Every day seemed to bring new challenges, and the quiet neighborhood he once dreamed of was turning into a place filled with tension and unfairness. Karen, the woman who was supposed to be just a neighbor, had become a big problem, and not just for him, but for his whole family. James woke up one morning to find Karen's car blocking his driveway again. This time, it wasn't just a little inconvenience. The car was parked so close that he couldn't even move his own vehicle out. He needed to get to work, but Karen's car was like a wall blocking his way. He tried to remain calm, but inside, he felt a mix of anger and disbelief. How could someone act so selfishly? This was his home, his driveway, not a public street. James called Karen on the phone, hoping she would finally understand and move her car. But Karen's voice was sharp and cold. "You need to get over it," she said. "Everyone has to share the space here. You're making too big a deal out of nothing." James knew it wasn't nothing. It was about respect and fairness. But Karen wasn't willing to listen. Feeling powerless, James decided to reach out again to the Homeowners Association, hoping that this time they would intervene and stop Karen's behavior. But the moment he explained the situation, he realized things were even worse than he thought. Karen was not only a neighbor but also a powerful member of the HOA board. She had friends on the board and influence over the decisions. This meant that the people who were supposed to protect James's rights were siding with Karen or ignoring his complaints. The HOA board meetings were no help. James attended one, hoping to speak up, but Karen and her supporters controlled the room. When James tried to explain what was happening, the board members brushed him off, saying he should try to be more patient and neighborly. James felt like he was invisible, as if his concerns didn't matter because of who he was. This made James feel isolated. He looked around the neighborhood for allies. Some neighbors privately agreed that Karen had a bad attitude, but they were afraid to speak up. Karen had a reputation for being mean and using her HOA position to punish those who disagreed with her. Neighbors whispered that she had kicked others out of the community or fined them unfairly just because they upset her. No one wanted to risk becoming her next target. Despite feeling alone, James refused to give up. He knew that if he stayed quiet, Karen would keep taking advantage of him and others. So he started collecting proof. He took photos of Karen's car parked in his driveway, showing how it blocked his access. He recorded videos of her ignoring his polite requests to move her car. He wrote down the dates and times when the incidents happened, building a clear record. He wanted to show the HOA, the police, or anyone who would listen that he was right. But then something unexpected happened. Instead of the HOA helping him, James received a warning letter. The letter said that James himself was breaking the parking rules. He was accused of having unauthorized vehicles parked in the community. This was confusing because James only had his own cars, and none of them were parked illegally. The letter threatened fines and penalties if he didn't fix the supposed violation. It felt like a trap, as if the HOA was turning against him, using the rules to punish the victim. James felt his frustration turn into hurt. The people who were supposed to protect the community and keep things fair were siding with Karen. It seemed like the whole system was stacked against him. He wondered if it was because of his skin color, or if Karen was simply too powerful to challenge. Either way, it was unfair and painful. At home, James's family saw how stressed he was. His wife worried about him. She reminded him to stay strong but also to be careful. Their daughter noticed the tension, and James tried his best to keep the situation from affecting her happiness. But the constant battles outside their door made it hard for the family to feel relaxed or safe. One afternoon, James talked to a neighbor named Mr. Thomas, an elderly man who had lived in the neighborhood for decades. Mr. Thomas shared that Karen had been causing trouble for years, especially for families who were different or new to the area. "She likes to control everything," Mr. Thomas said quietly, "and she doesn't like it when people don't agree with her." This conversation gave James some hope. If others had faced similar problems and still stayed, maybe he could find a way to handle this too. He realized he wasn't alone, even if many neighbors were afraid to show their support publicly. He felt more determined to stand up, not just for himself, but for anyone else who might face unfair treatment. James began researching his legal rights as a homeowner. He read about laws protecting property owners and cases where people had fought HOA boards over unfair rules. He learned that he could challenge the HOA if they were abusing their power. This knowledge gave him confidence. He wasn't helpless. He had tools to protect himself. As days passed, Karen's behavior didn't improve. She continued parking in his driveway without any respect for James's requests. Sometimes she parked so close that James's car was trapped. Once James came home late at night and had to walk several blocks because he couldn't get his car out. It was frustrating and humiliating. Despite the difficulties, James remained calm in public. He didn't want to make the situation worse by reacting angrily or causing a scene. He believed that staying respectful and using facts was the best way to win. His patience was tested every day, but he kept reminding himself that he was doing the right thing. The neighborhood atmosphere began to change. People whispered about the conflict between James and Karen. Some were curious, some disapproved of Karen's attitude, but most stayed silent. The community that once felt welcoming now felt tense and divided. James wondered how a simple thing, like parking a car, could cause so much trouble. James's story started to catch the attention of a few neighbors who had been quiet before. Some of them approached him privately to share their own experiences with Karen or the HOA. They thanked James for standing up and said they wished more people would do the same. This support gave James strength. Even though the HOA continued to send confusing letters and warnings, James decided he wouldn't back down. He began talking to a local lawyer to understand how he could protect his rights if the conflict escalated. He wanted to be prepared for any situation. One day, James received a call from a community leader who had heard about his situation. The leader encouraged James to document everything carefully and offered to help bring attention to the unfair treatment he was facing. James felt hopeful. Maybe with more support, things could finally change. As part 2 of the story ends, James is no longer just a frustrated homeowner. He is a man ready to fight for his rights, armed with knowledge, evidence, and growing support. The battle with Karen and the HOA is far from over, but James's determination shines brighter than ever. James's frustration had reached a breaking point. Karen's repeated disrespect and the HOA's unwillingness to support him left him feeling powerless for too long. But James was a man of principle. He knew that sometimes standing up for what is right means taking bold steps. After all the warnings, ignored requests, and false accusations, James decided it was time to take action, in a way that could not be ignored. One morning, after finding Karen's car parked again in his driveway, blocking him from leaving for work, James called a local towing company. He explained the situation carefully, showing the photos and videos he had collected. The towing company understood the problem and agreed to send a truck to remove Karen's car from James's private property. James waited nervously. He knew this would cause a big reaction. He wasn't trying to be mean. He just wanted to protect his right to use his own driveway. When the tow truck arrived, Karen appeared almost immediately. She was furious, yelling and screaming that James was harassing her and threatening to sue him for harassment and property damage. James stayed calm. He showed the towing company driver and the police officers who had arrived the video proof and documents proving that Karen had no right to park in his driveway. The officers confirmed that James was within his rights to have the car removed. Karen's angry shouts did not change the fact that James was defending his property legally and properly. The incident didn't stay quiet for long. A neighbor who had witnessed the argument took videos on their phone and shared them on social media. The story quickly spread throughout the neighborhood and online forums. Many people sympathized with James, applauding his courage to stand up against unfair treatment. Some expressed outrage at Karen's behavior and the HOA's earlier inaction. Despite the public attention, Karen refused to back down. Instead, she grew more defensive and aggressive. She claimed she was the victim of racial discrimination and harassment, turning the story around to make James seem like the bad guy. But the evidence, photos, videos, and official documents, spoke clearly in James's favor. The neighborhood was divided. Some residents supported James quietly but feared speaking openly against Karen because of her powerful position on the HOA board. Others chose to stay neutral, not wanting to get involved in a conflict they saw as just a neighbor disagreement. But many began questioning the HOA's leadership and the fairness of their rules. James was surprised by the growing support from unexpected places. A local community group reached out to him, offering advice and encouraging him to keep fighting for justice. A few neighbors even came forward to share their own stories of unfair treatment by Karen or the HOA, showing that James was not alone. As the pressure increased, the HOA tried to contain the situation by sending letters urging both James and Karen to act neighborly and resolve their differences peacefully. But James knew this was just a way to avoid taking responsibility for the real problem: Karen's repeated rule-breaking and abuse of power. Karen's next move was to escalate her attacks. She began spreading rumors about James trying to damage his reputation in the community. Some neighbors believed her stories, making James's life even harder. However, James focused on staying respectful and calm, refusing to respond with anger or insults. The public attention also caught the eye of local news reporters. A journalist came to interview James and cover the story about neighborhood conflicts, HOA abuse of power, and issues of racial discrimination. The news report showed James's side clearly, highlighting his efforts to protect his rights without resorting to violence or hostility. The community reaction to the news story was mixed, but largely supportive of James. Many people expressed hope that his stand would lead to positive changes in the neighborhood. Some began demanding that the HOA review its policies and ensure fair treatment for all residents, regardless of background. For James, The attention was both a blessing and a challenge. It gave him strength to continue, but also brought new stress and pressure. He had to balance fighting the conflict with maintaining his family's peace. His wife worried about the toll it was taking on him, and his daughter missed the calm, happy home she had imagined when they first moved in. James found comfort in small moments: a friendly smile from a neighbor who supported him, a kind message online from strangers who believed in his cause, or quiet family dinners where they talked about hope for the future. These moments reminded him why he was fighting. Despite Karen's efforts to make him look bad, the truth was clear to many. James was standing up for himself in a fair, legal, and respectful way. The neighborhood began to see that the problem wasn't James, but Karen's behavior and the HOA's failure to act responsibly. By the end of this part of the story, James had transformed from a frustrated homeowner to a community figure standing for justice and fairness. His actions showed others that it's possible to fight back against unfair treatment without losing dignity or respect. The battle wasn't over yet, but James's courage had already inspired change. More neighbors started to speak up. The HOA was under pressure to reform. Karen's position was becoming weaker, and James, though tired from the fight, was more determined than ever to protect his home and family. This chapter of the story shows how standing firm with evidence, patience, and respect can turn the tide, even against powerful opposition. James's choice to take legal action and involve others brought attention to the problem and gave hope to those who had felt powerless before. The next part of the story would show what happens when Karen refuses to accept defeat and tries to push back harder. But James, now stronger and better prepared, is ready for whatever comes next. After the car was towed the first time, Karen's anger didn't calm down. If anything, it grew stronger. She couldn't believe that James, her neighbor, had taken such a bold step against her. For Karen, it wasn't just about a car parked in a driveway. It was about control. She was used to getting her way and having others follow her rules without question. James had challenged that, and she was furious. Karen's reaction was fierce. She began visiting neighbors, trying to spread her side of the story. She painted herself as the victim, saying James was harassing her unfairly. Some neighbors believed her because she was well connected in the HOA and often portrayed herself as a pillar of the community. Others were unsure what to think, hearing both sides, but lacking clear information. James, meanwhile, stayed focused. He knew Karen's anger might bring more trouble, but he was prepared. He continued documenting everything carefully. Each time Karen parked in his driveway, he took photos and videos. He saved every letter and message from the HOA and Karen herself. He even started writing down what neighbors said about the situation, knowing that testimonies could help if the conflict reached court. One morning, James found Karen's car in his driveway again, for the third time. This time, he didn't hesitate. He called the towing company again. The truck came, and Karen showed up angry once more, shouting about discrimination and threats. But the tow driver was professional and explained that James had the right to protect his property. This second towing incident made the neighborhood take notice. People talked about the situation more openly. Some expressed support for James, impressed by his calm and measured way of standing up for his rights. Others worried about the growing tension and wished there was a way to resolve things peacefully. Karen's response was to push harder. She started using her HOA position to file complaints against James. She claimed he was violating community rules in other ways, some true, some exaggerated or false. She requested fines and penalties against him, hoping to make his life difficult. The HOA board, still influenced by Karen, began investigating James's property. They sent letters accusing him of rule violations like having unapproved vehicles and keeping his lawn too long. James knew these accusations were mostly unfair, but he took them seriously. He hired a local lawyer to help respond to the claims and protect his rights. James's lawyer advised him to keep calm and not retaliate publicly. Legal battles could be long and stressful, but standing firm with facts and documentation was the best way to win. James followed this advice, focusing on evidence and polite communication. During this time, James's family felt the stress deeply. His wife often worried about how much energy James was putting into the fight. Their daughter sometimes asked why people didn't like their family. James reassured her, teaching her that sometimes people are unfair, but standing up for yourself is important. Neighbors began to notice how James handled the situation, with dignity and patience, even when facing hostility. A few neighbors started quietly supporting him. One neighbor offered to share photos of Karen parking in places she wasn't allowed. Another offered to testify if needed. These small acts of support gave James hope. The conflict began to highlight deeper issues in the neighborhood. Some residents realized the HOA was not as fair or neutral as it should be. They started discussing the need for change. A few even talked about running for HOA board positions to restore balance and fairness. Meanwhile, Karen's attitude hardened. She refused to admit any fault and continued using her HOA influence to pressure James. She also made personal attacks, trying to discredit him in the community. But many people saw through her behavior and felt sympathy for James. At one point, James decided to hold a small meeting with some neighbors who supported him. They talked about what was happening and shared ideas for how to improve the neighborhood's management. They agreed to work together to demand transparency and fairness from the HOA. James also reached out to local civil rights organizations to get advice on how to handle possible discrimination. They offered resources and encouraged him to keep documenting everything carefully. The neighborhood was changing. What started as a personal conflict had turned into a community issue. More people were paying attention to the way the HOA operated and how Karen used her power. James's courage inspired others to speak up and demand respect for all residents. Even though the fight was exhausting, James felt stronger. He knew he wasn't just protecting his driveway. He was standing for fairness and justice in his neighborhood. His actions were helping to create a better community for his family and his neighbors. This part of the story shows how standing firm, even when facing powerful opposition, can lead to small but meaningful changes. James's calm persistence and careful documentation were tools to fight back against unfairness and abuse of power. The battle was still ongoing, but the neighborhood was beginning to see the importance of fairness and respect. James's stand was a reminder that one person's courage could inspire a whole community to demand better. After the second towing, the neighborhood had started to change. What had been a quiet, tense situation was now a big conversation in the community. People were no longer just whispering behind closed doors. The story of James and Karen had become an example of what happens when one person stands up to unfair treatment and refuses to back down. But this new attention brought both hope and challenges. James knew that this fight was about more than just parking spots or cars. It was about respect, fairness, and equality. He was fighting not only for himself but for all those who had felt ignored or mistreated by the HOA and Karen's behavior. James realized that his actions had sparked something bigger, a push for change in the way the neighborhood was run. Karen, meanwhile, was furious. The second towing was a big blow to her control. She had lost her power over James's driveway, and the neighborhood's eyes were on her. Karen's usual tactics, shouting, threatening, and using her HOA position, weren't working as well anymore. People were starting to see her true nature and were questioning her authority. Determined to regain control, Karen tried new ways to fight back. She pushed the HOA to fine James heavily for supposed violations. She tried to block neighbors who supported him from attending HOA meetings. She sent aggressive letters demanding that James stop his complaints or face legal action. But this time, her moves only strengthened James's resolve. James prepared carefully for each new challenge. He kept working with his lawyer, making sure All his paperwork and evidence were organized. He responded to the HOA's claims calmly and professionally, never letting anger or frustration show. He also talked to neighbors regularly, sharing updates and encouraging them to stay united. One day, the HOA held an important meeting to discuss the ongoing conflict. James attended, along with several neighbors who supported him. They spoke clearly and respectfully, presenting their concerns about Karen's misuse of power and the need for fair treatment for everyone in the community. The meeting was tense but hopeful. Some board members began to admit that the situation had been mishandled and that changes were needed. There was talk about creating new policies to prevent abuse of power and protect homeowners' rights better. James and his supporters felt that their voices were finally being heard. Karen, however, refused to accept any fault. She argued fiercely, insisting that James was the problem and that she was just enforcing the rules. But her arguments sounded less convincing this time. The growing support for James and the demand for fairness made it clear that Karen's time in control was coming to an end. Meanwhile, James's family was proud of how he handled everything. Though it had been hard, they felt stronger together. James's wife and daughter saw how much he cared and how brave he was to fight not just for their home, but for the whole community. Their support gave James even more strength. As the months passed, the neighborhood slowly began to heal. The HOA started implementing new rules to ensure fairness and transparency. New board members were elected, people who were committed to listening to all residents and acting with honesty. James's fight had changed the community. What once was a place where fear and silence ruled was becoming a neighborhood where voices mattered and respect was expected. James's courage had shown that one person could make a difference. Though Karen still lived in the neighborhood, her influence was much weaker. She could no longer control the HOA or intimidate neighbors. The community had moved on, stronger and more united. James continued to live in his home, proud of the life he built and the stand he took. His driveway was no longer a battleground but a place of peace and welcome. His story inspired others to stand up for their rights and to believe in fairness. This last part of the story shows the power of persistence, calm strength, and community support. James's decision to stand up against unfairness changed not only his life, but also his neighborhood. It was a story of courage, justice, and hope.